a lot of people, they tend to focus on only the toxins. Like, oh, I want to avoid, MSG, or I want to avoid glyphosate. And what I've tried to explain to people over time, and even my own position has matured on this over time. I used to be actually a lot more panicked about it than I am now. But what I realize now is that when you have good nutrition and you have the trace minerals and the macro minerals and the phytonutrients that God intended for us to eat, your body can naturally defend against a lot of toxic load. And since we live in a toxic world, there's no way to avoid some level of dioxins or even glyphosate. I did a study in our lab. I bought, I don't know, 20 brands of beer and tested them for glyphosate. I think it was just like popular beer brands. And then I put out the results. And I didn't find any of them that had alarming levels of glyphosate, even though we detected some level of glyphosate in every beer. But the levels were very small, like in some cases, single-digit parts per billion. And I explained to people you would have to drink like a swimming pool filled with beer to have a toxic load of glyphosate from this beer. I got a little bit of pushback from some people who said, well, even 1 part per billion, could give you cancer. And my reaction is, I don't actually think that's true. Unless you're crazy nutritionally deficient and you're weak and you're fragile, you have no immune system functioning, then toxins can have a big effect on you. But the way to get your nutrition is to eat wholesome, real foods, like, what Joel does there. When you're raising real beef on, real grass and real food, and some supplementation, I'm sure that there's mineral supplementation that, cattle ranchers typically use. And that's actually really important. Isn't it interesting that doctors never tell humans to supplement with minerals, but every cattle rancher knows to supplement with minerals, right? And my granddad raised cattle, and I grew up around a cattle farm, by the way. So I'm very familiar with that. But that's because that keeps the cattle healthy. It prevents disease. It prevents toxins from overcoming the body's defenses. Well, the same thing's true with humans. So if you're eating, the other part of the question is, if you're eating heavily processed factory foods, like cookies and crackers and cake and whatever, refined everything, refined white bread, yeah, of course, you're going to lack minerals, and then you're vulnerable to the toxins. So my takeaway from all of this is, don't panic about the trace levels of toxins that are in the food, but take in high nutrient density foods, including superfoods, and where necessary, possibly supplements if you're lacking in a certain area. And then don't freak out about it. Just be okay.
Yeah. Have that faith over fear. Yeah. Yes. So even though the label is not perfect, as Joel and I can attest to with the USDA organic label, for example, do you still choose organic produce over conventional produce, in part because of the biosludge? Okay, so you do.
Yeah. I do. Well, and also specifically, I really want to avoid the organophosphates, the pesticides, even more than the herbicides. The pesticides really interfere with neurology. And although I consume a lot of neuroprotective substances like turmeric on a regular basis, I don't want to damage my brain with pesticides. So yeah, I choose organic whenever possible, but I also understand that it's not enough by itself.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. Wow. Joel, I think he's our third P in the pod. Right? He sounds like us.
Yeah. Well, that's for sure. And I seen it. We banter back and forth about my 80-20. And see, now I'll put you on the spot a little bit here, but one is bad, and I'm saying 80-20 lets me go to a 3-year-old's birthday party and eat Walmart chocolate cake and not whatever.
That's right.
Not beat myself up over it, or not make a scene, in the family get together, whatever.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes I wonder if our purest paranoia to be 100% perfect causes more stress than if we just 80-20, 80 do it right, and 20 gives you a little bit of wiggle room to be whatever, to be a nice guest.
Well, I'm right there.
I travel a lot. People are always, what they're paranoid about what they're going to feed me.
I've
look,
experienced that.
The only thing I'm allergic to is McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. Okay, so just but then from what you just said, just think about the latest whatever research. 77% of all food that Americans consume, I might be wrong on 1%, but basically 77% of all food Americans consume is ultra processed.
Yeah.
So that's going to make you vulnerable to all these things. So suddenly their ability to hurt you elevates through the roof compared to somebody like the three of us who are at least, let's say 80-20. Cena's probably 95-5, but 80-20 is good enough to make a big change.
Well, I think that's a very wise posture. And also as a food scientist myself and someone who's, lectured about food and studied it, we have to realize there's a very strong cultural orbit around food, just as you were alluding to there, Joel, which is that people use food during celebrations at weddings and birthday parties and get-togethers. And it's often very discourteous to reject people's food. On the other hand, there are many of us like myself who are very sensitive to things like MSG. And since MSG or free glutamate is very common in many prepared foods or processed foods, sometimes I do have to kind of query someone who, let's say, cooked a meal. They created a meal, it's biscuits and gravy. And I have to ask them, well, how did you make the gravy? Oh, well, it's from a gravy mix. Well, immediately I know I can't eat that because that's MSG. And sometimes I'll say, well, what my grandmother used to do was, take the sausage. She would cook the sausage in the pan and then take the grease. And then the grease makes the gravy. And then you add the flour and the salt and pepper. That's real gravy. Like if you have that, I'm happy to eat that. I'm not going to eat this pre-mixed MSG gravy, right? So they are going to hear that from me, but I'm not going to make them feel stupid about it. I'm just going to say, I'll need to choose something different.
Yeah. You'll love it. Back when we first started our commercial egg part of our enterprise, we were taking our eggs down to an actual an egg factory about 20 miles away, and we would collect them all for a week, and then we'd take all these eggs down there. They'd run them through their washer, candler, and grater and sorter, and box them up, and so when we first went down there, and so what they do is they would run ours through, and then they would run theirs through because we didn't want their contamination on our eggs.
Oh.
And, anyway, we didn't do that very long. We only did that for, I don't know what, 4 or 5 months. And then we started doing everything ourselves. But anyway, the lady in the tent that was candling the eggs for cracks and blood spots, things like that. I asked her, she's over this candling, and I said, what do you do with all the cracks and stuff? So, she's putting the cracks in a separate carton there. She said, they go down the road here and they put them in a great big chamber with a big piston that squeezes them. So I want you to realize these are eggs. They have chicken manure on them. They're just okay. So they just dump all these eggs in a great big cylinder, a hydraulic cylinder that presses the eggs through a screen and keeps the shells on one side and all the liquid on the other side, along with some chicken manure and things like that.
Oh yeah.
And I said, what are those sold for? Said, those go to Duncan Hines and stuff. So when you get a cake mix, and they use them in cake mixes because they're going to be cooked, they're going to be baked. So it's very low risk to have a little bit of poop and stuff in there, if you're going to actually cook it and bake it. And so ever since that day, we always tell people with a big smile, hey, if you're going to use a cake mix, get it without eggs, make sure you add eggs, because if you don't have to add eggs, it might be a little bit dicey.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, but I will tell you, my dogs don't mind chicken eggs with little chicken poop on them either. Right.
Yeah.
They
Sure.
They go right for them, but you're right. We don't want to be eating that, but it goes to show you sort of the factory food model, what that entails. And, a lot of people would be horrified about what's actually what ends up in their food. But I think we should be a lot more concerned about what's not in the food. The mineral depletion is really, really critical. And I think as your viewers are well informed, they know that minerals cannot be synthesized by plants. So this, it seems like a really basic thing for a lot of us who have been in this business for a long time, but the typical food consumer does not realize this, that plants synthesize vitamins and phytonutrients like vitamin C or sulforaphane from broccoli or curcumin in turmeric. These are synthesized mostly from carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But minerals, obviously being on the table of elements, cannot be synthesized except through fusion and fission, which does not happen in plants. It happens in exploding stars, right? So when the soils are depleted of minerals because of continued farming, which is a mineral extraction process, if those minerals are not replaced back into the soils, then subsequent generations of crops are, of course, mineral deficient. And most people are living on mineral deficient foods. And when you are mineral deficient, then your body cannot function as it was intended to function. Your cells can't function. The cellular energy, the mitochondria, all of it. You need trace copper. You need trace selenium. You need, macro amounts of magnesium and calcium. It's so funny to me. Sometimes people ask me, like, what should I take as a calcium supplement? I'm like, plants, because they're all loaded with calcium. Eat broccoli. You need calcium, eat broccoli. You need calcium, just drink smoothies, man. They're loaded with calcium. Plants won't grow without calcium. But people are lacking trace minerals, and that's a big cause of degenerative disease, in my view.
Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought-provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full, uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.